So many exciting things happening. Mike's here, and he's going to tell us about the bike trail. I'm over the moon. Sorry, I can't contain myself. All right, so I'm Catherine Holcomb, President of St. Mary Excel. We're going to go around the room really quickly, introduce yourselves, tell us who you're affiliated with, and then we'll get started with the meeting.
Hi, I'm Monica Mancuso, Executive Director, St. Mary Excel.
I'm Abby Littman. I'm a planner at the Water Institute.
I'm Scott Hemmerling, lead scientist at the Water Institute.
Carrie Stansbury, Cajun Coast Tourism.
Paige just cleared the Coastal Technical Assistance Center.
I'm Colleen Askew from the Town of Broward Government Council.
Evan Boudreau, Director of Economic Development for St. Mary Parish.
Greg Risco, Risco Marketing.
Mike Ricotta, St. Mary Levy District.
Cindy Cotriera, Port of Morgan City.
Serena Garrett, Board of Directors with Kiwanis.
Michael Luke, City of Morgan City.
Lou Tamperillis, City Council, Morgan City, soon to be private individual.
Jana King, I'm with the Water Institute, and I'll be taking your photos today.
Charles Wallace, Science Policy Fellow, Water Institute.
Roger Bodian, Executive Director of the Atchafalaya Coastal Coalition.
And Debbie Torline, St. Mary Excel.
And
that leaves me with Mr. Charlie, Rig Museum, and Keep St. Mary Beautiful.
And just as a matter of housekeeping, Lou Tamperillo said something about soon to be something else. We do have a little card of appreciation. I don't know if you don't know, but since our inception, Lou Tamperillo has been a part of making Excel what it is as representing government. So we have a little card of appreciation, and we also have a little task that he'll always be here, seated at the table, to continue the work of moving the community forward. So, Lou, we couldn't have done it without you, and we want to recognize you. Debbie, get that card. You gave it to me. Thank you.
And I have no doubt he will always be around doing everything because he just can't help himself.
But we do have a seat at this table, and it is always his guidance and connectedness with each and every entity is so critical to advancing this work. So with that, we go to item number 2, Resilience Lab Planning, and turn it over to the Water Institute because a lot of work has happened since the last time we got together.
So we want to mention that the planning team for the Resilience Lab, as we can see here, the Water Institute, so Charles Wallace in the back, Abby, Jessica Henkel is kind of our fourth person and our fearless leader. She couldn't make it in today, but Aptum, St. Mary Excel, and the parish are all working together to work on the strategic planning for the Resilience Lab. So today at the meeting, we're going to kind of go through, we're going to recap the purpose, goals, objectives. What is the Resilience Lab? I know we've heard since the ULI report came out back in 2018. It's been a while where we've been kind of getting us to this point. And we're going to give an example of some of the things that other resilience labs around the country do. There's one in particular we're going to focus a little bit on because also at our first meeting, that was one of the things that came up is, what is this going to be? Are there examples of it? So we're going to show an example of that. And then we're going to go to the strategic planning process, and Abby's going to kind of walk through a lot of the work she's been doing kind of in the background to get us to where we are today. And then we're going to discuss some potential pilot projects and research focus areas that came out of that first meeting. And then we'll go on to next steps. So, and I'm really excited to show that for those of you who are in the room. If you remember, we had notes all over the wall, lots of scribblings with, and seeing what this turned into and some of the stuff that come out of this is really pretty impressive to see. But just as a bit of background, we want to, again, highlight the Urban Land Institute report that came out and the reason we're here to discuss the Resilience Lab. There was a section when they talked about and came in and did this kind of economic review of the parish and what do we need, what can help out kind of Morgan City and the parish in general. One of their suggestions was a resilience lab. That's what they noted here. It's taken directly from the report. Given the celebrated history of groundbreaking innovation, first of a kind fabrication successes, Morgan City possesses a unique opportunity to develop pilot projects in the emerging resilience technology space in the form of a coastal resilience lab. And they pointed out in the report, part of why this is this is such an ideal location for a lab like this is because of the proximity to several other organizations. There's no university here, but if you see on the map here, we're kind of surrounded. We have Lumcon, Tulane, Nicholls, ULL, LSU, and even McNeese off to the west. We're kind of centrally located so this is really a great location to bring kind of the best of kind of the scientific knowledge of the state into the parish and into this region. And also, I think one thing that I really find this a perfect area for this is if we look, the Wax Lake Delta is one of the only land building locations in the state. That makes this a really unique place to study coastal resilience because the goal of the state and its master plan and all of these kind of other efforts is really to build land. So some of the things that we're seeing here, some of the things the port faces with excess sediment, if the master plan is fully implemented, we're going to be shifting sediment all over the coast. This is really an ideal location to study things from the socioeconomic perspective, the environmental perspective, the ecological perspective. So what we're doing now is really, what we showed in the previous couple of slides is really what the ULI report said about the lab. There was not a lot of details, and in the whole report, there was just a page, a few paragraphs where they mentioned it. And one of the things we need to do is really develop a strategic plan for the lab. What will the lab be? What will it do? Is it going to be a physical space? Is it going to be a virtual space? Is it going to start as virtual and transition? There's all of these things we need to consider when we decide what this resilience lab is going to be. And that's going to come through the strategic planning process. And one of the things with this process is we don't want this strategic plan to come from Baton Rouge or New Orleans. The strategic plan has to come from the community members. Because if the lab is going to support the community, it has to address the things that are important to the community. So the process that we're going through involves pulling stakeholders together to really help co-develop the strategic plan. And so working with these stakeholders, we're going to identify management alternatives that are economically feasible. We can't go right in, jump all in, new building, build it up, and what's the economic feasibility? What's the timeline for developing out the resilience lab? And so it's got to be a long-term process. So the plan it can't just be we're going to do this now and then forget about it. It's like, what do we need to do to make this sustainable so it's something that we can do and operate into the future? So what does the ULI report tell us about the lab? Well, it can develop and pilot projects in the emerging resilience technology space, as the previous slide showed. Provide access to potential testing grounds for strategies and technologies. This is a great place to kind of test some of the technologies that can make our communities more resilient. Let's leverage our local entrepreneurs that are close enough to share the equipment and exchange ideas. It can be folks from the parish, and then, like we said, the surrounding universities. Create opportunities for partnerships and collaborations. That's really a big thing, and that's when I pointed out the fact that none of the universities are located here. That makes this an ideal location for collaboration, where people can come in. There's not going to be any turf wars about this. It's what can we develop here that can benefit the entire state? And launch opportunities to develop supporting enterprises, such as offices, training areas, research labs, and community space. So that's really kind of what we're looking towards and what we're moving towards with this, is how can the lab become a physical reality? And I mentioned that, what other places has this occurred in? Now there's a few. There's one in North Carolina that's in the Research Triangle there. Has Homeland Security funding, and that does a lot of kind of very engineering focused, very much like, okay, what is the structural integrity of levees? Let's do some geotech work. There's things like that. There's also other ones, like the one I'm going to show here in Norfolk, where they have a resilience lab, the Ryan Resilience Lab. And some of the things they're interested in, and this is a nonprofit, and I'm partial to this one because kind of reading their history, it started off with a couple, I believe it was retired teachers, sitting around a kitchen table, a decade or two ago, and like, what can we do to improve resilience in the Norfolk area? So I'm like, and looking at how they developed that out, I can see a lot of similarities to what we can do here. So they're really focused on sustainable living in flood-prone areas. As we know that, I mean, coastal Louisiana is a flood-prone area, and with the kind of the near miss we had this summer, or this late summer, early fall with the storms here, that really shows, this is a need here. It's an epicenter for environmental research, but it also can bring, this lab, you can have community events there, you can, have the arts, you can have events there with this building. So that's some of these kind of multi-use things that come out of this particular lab are really intriguing and interesting, and we can see a lot of connections why things like this could work here. It's designed to teach the world's coastal residents and businesses how to respond to changing hazards. We've seen it all here in Louisiana. If anyone can, Norfolk has seen their hazards. They're subsiding. They have a lot of, but we've seen our share in Louisiana. And that explores, displays, and models key concepts and approaches that will lead the way to a more sustainable future. That comes right out of their kind of mission plan for the lab. And they have a number of key focus areas, and that's one of the things that we need to really, what are the key focus areas of the St. Mary? What is, our resilience lab, what is that going to look like? But what their focus, adapting to a changing climate, features to absorb flooding. What can we do? Flooding's going to occur. What can we do in terms of green infrastructure and permeable pavement? These types of things. What can we do to absorb the flooding that we know is going to happen? But they're also interested in energy and environmental resilience. Now, energy resilience, that's also obviously very big down here with the oil and gas industry. So a lot of their work is focused on the Elizabeth River, and this is again in Norfolk, Virginia. And a lot of their work is focused on restoration. But they also, as I mentioned, I wanted to include this slide in here because it shows that once the space is there, there's other things you can do with it that can really, how can the lab help St. Mary Parish in general? Well, once you start doing some of these other things, bring in youth programming, native plant learning gardens, you can start having events there. You can draw people in, you can draw students in, you can do wetland plantings. They have an oyster summer camp for high schoolers to study, grow, and release oysters. So when we think about workforce development and kind of training the next generation for being involved in these types of coastal industries, and I know we've had conversations about the maritime high school and things like that could potentially be coming here some years down the line, but things like this where this is really a building ground for that. So we can see, even though we will do a lot of studies and things like that, there's also opportunities for this to be a gathering place in the community. And if we do this right, this will be something that will be really take St. Mary Parish and kind of into the future and really allow this area to be a leader in this process. So with that, I'm gonna send it over to Abby to kind of talk about the first workshop we had and kind of the next steps to get us to kind of the grand vision that I just laid out.
Awesome. So I'm going to give a recap, and a lot of folks in this room obviously were there, so this might be a little bit of a double recap, but going to go through kind of the process that we went through in the workshop and then some of the outcomes that we're bringing into the planning process. So this is a list of attendees, organizations that we had at the workshop, number 1, and there are still some other folks that are going to be workshops 2 and 3 that are not on this list, but this was the gist. We had folks from the government, the levee district, City of Morgan City, Patterson, and Town of Berwick. We had GOCA there, we had CPRA, CTAC, obviously, Paige was there, Port of Morgan City, we had a representative from the Army Corps, the Coast Guard, Cajun Coast Visitor Center, some representatives from the business community, and then university partners. So this list isn't comprehensive. These are the folks that were at workshop 1, but we'll have folks from LomCon at MULL hopefully at the 2nd and 3rd workshop. And so basically what we brought to the first workshop was these draft fundamental objectives. There are 7 of them. And these kind of are supposed to be very high level and sort of set the tone for where we're going with the planning process. And then we came together with stakeholders in the room and basically said, like, in order to achieve, first of all, are these the right objectives? And then second of all, if we're going to achieve these objectives, what are the discrete actions that need to be taken by the lab in order to achieve these? So we have maximize implementation of projects that serve the region, maximize the export of proven ideas and resources to serve coastal communities and estuarine environments, maximize funding for resilience-focused pilot projects, maximize Resilience Lab feasibility and sustainability, maximize opportunities for collaboration and resource sharing, maximize the region's positive image for desirability for investment, and maximize economic development opportunities. So these are really like the high-level goals and objectives. And the reason why you see maximize so many times is because this is a very sort of structured process that we're using called structured decision making. So the objectives need to be directional so that we can kind of measure them. And so what we did, here we go. So like I said, what we did in the room was we came together, we did a lot of, took a lot of notes, asked people about, what kind of potential actions could help achieve those objectives, what are some other thoughts that people had, were we missing anything? We had pretty good representation in the room, and then we asked folks at the end to sort of, at a very high level, just kind of prioritize, once we came up with all these ideas, put a sticker next to something that's, priority for you and your organization and you think should be, kind of rising to the top in this process. Not to say that we're like eliminating anything from that, but we just wanted to get an idea of what was most important to folks. And then what we did from there was we went back and we disseminated everything. So this is just kind of like, you're not supposed to be able to read this. It's very messy, but just to give you an idea of like how we're moving things around. This is like our digital whiteboard. We're moving things around. We're thinking about how to organize as part of the strategic plan. How can we, kind of streamline things, make it make sense. I think the strategic plan will have multiple purposes. One is to like really set the direction for this, but also there's going to need to be funding. So we need like a very solid kind of airtight plan. And this is gonna help us get there. So this was kind of our initial cut at making sense of all of the workshop outputs. And so what we did from there was we met with St. Mary Excel in the parish in one of our bi-weekly meetings, and we talked about kind of how to revise a couple of the fundamental objectives, and they actually didn't change too much. But what we did was we realized there was a lot of talk at workshop one about transparency for the lab, and there were a lot of actions that kind of came out of the workshop talking about, if this lab is going to be sustainable and going to have longevity, like we need to make sure it's transparent in the data, it's transparent in how we're communicating its functions to the community. So what we decided to do based on all of that feedback was we kind of revised these objectives, and we added an objective to number 1 called Maximize Resilience Lab Transparency. So that has a bunch of actions that fall under it. And then we basically combined the language in 1 and 2, or 1 and 3 rather, and made that, made 3 a little bit more comprehensive. So maximize funding and implementation for resilience-focused pilot projects that serve the region. So not too big of a change, but a change nonetheless. And so before I go into the next part, talking about some kind of examples, I think one thing that we really want to make sure people understand is, and that folks in the workshop want people to understand, is like, we don't want this to be research for the sake of research, like not research to just like go out into the ether. It's not like, in that way, I think it can be different from a university in that like, it's not all going to be exploratory. Some of it will be informed by what the community needs. A lot of it will. So I think the idea is we want research to support local pilot projects, research to support exportable solutions. So what are opportunities in the parish and challenges that the parish faces that also other places, whether it's in the Southeast or other places around the country also face that can be exportable, and then research that involves the local community. So it's not just the lab saying you need this, but the community may be saying we want to pilot X, Y, and Z, can the lab research this? Or we want to seek funding for this, can the lab research this in order to make the case for funding? And so some potential research focus areas that came out of the workshop, and these are very draft, they're nothing set in stone. We're still going to report this back to the stakeholders in workshop number 2. But some examples that came out were evaluate alternative insurance opportunities. So I know in Franklin, particularly, we're looking at parametric insurance. So that's just one example, but this came up in the workshop. That's an opportunity. Across the country in coastal areas, we're seeing lots of issues with insurance. Opportunities for beneficial use of dredge material to support navigation in the economy. Explore community training projects that have economic benefits, and there are even more specific kind of actions that came out of that from the workshop. So like ecotourism, like kind of what does that look like? Opportunities for hydroelectric energy production to strengthen energy resilience, modeling green infrastructure opportunities for the parish to reduce stormwater flooding, study fisheries and aquaculture to support educational opportunities, ecotourism, and ecological resilience, and then explore opportunities for ecotourism expansion to support economic and ecological resilience. So there's more, but we were like, let's highlight some for this meeting right here. And then some potential pilot projects that also kind of came out of workshop one were established a community training program focused on building resiliently, so specifically related to like homes and buildings. And that doesn't necessarily mean that like everyone's elevating their home, but what are some other ways that we can teach folks to build a little bit more resiliently or build back more resiliently? Implement coordinated green infrastructure projects, produce a how-to guide, to highlight benefits and tips for coastal living, development of parish-led ecotourism hub to increase visitation to St. Mary Parish. And I know Cajun Coast Visitor Center already does a ton there, so there's like opportunities for collaboration. A lot of this won't be like starting from scratch, but this is kind of a place where we can think about those partnerships. And then implement parametric insurance pilot project was, that's something that's ongoing, but there might be more work there as well. And so Scott kind of talked about the Norfolk Resilience Lab, called the Ryan Resilience Lab, but wanted to also highlight, like I said, this isn't, I don't think anybody wants this to be research just for the sake of it. Like this is supposed to be really like usable and a place that the community can use for other things as well. So where has this been done before? Want to look at some like research to on the ground projects. So like how can research inform on the ground projects and not just go into the ether. So this is just one, and I know there's ecotourism here, and there are probably opportunities to expand it, but this is one example of where the University of Florida Ecotourism Lab did a lot of research and was able to provide data to help Key West develop like an actual ecotourism program to focus on reducing the environmental impact of tourism. So that was like eco-friendly accommodations, sustainable tours, wildlife conservation efforts. And so this is just one example of how research can turn into pilot projects. Another one is out of Pennsylvania. So in Philadelphia, they have this Green City Clean Waters initiative. So they do a lot of green infrastructure interventions throughout the city to soak up stormwater and water filtration benefits as well. And a lot of that research came out of Drexel and UPenn. So a lot of this work and a lot of these sort of programs that you see around the country, like they're not just developed in a vacuum. Like the government doesn't just say we should do this and kind of throw everything at the wall. There is like this sort of coordinated research that goes into it before these programs are actually implemented. And these are just a couple of examples from the Green City Clean Waters program. So, there's stormwater incentives. It's like a very large program, but just wanted to give an example of kind of how research is important in informing these types of projects. And then this is like, I think a hypothetical, right? Like this is like, okay, St. Mary Parish Research Lab, we don't know, or Resilience Lab, we don't know exactly what we're doing just yet, but like, what if there was research at Nicholls State that provided, opportunities or provided data and research around ecotourism, and that provided opportunities for the parish to develop or expand out ecotourism opportunities.
And I'll just mention before she goes on to the rest of the timeline, just to kind of reiterate that this strategic plan is for the lab itself. So what we're talking about now are some of the types of projects that can come out of the lab. What we're basically thinking about is the lab as a vehicle to get the projects done. Our planning process isn't to develop the stormwater resilience components here, but setting up the structure for that to take place. And I think one of the important reasons for doing this and having this strategic plan is, as whether it's St. Mary Excel or the parish or any of these organizations go for funding in the future to fund any of these types of projects, having this plan in place is something that when you go to a funder and you say, it's not just ULI said we need to have this resilience lab. They said we need to have this resilience lab. Now we have a strategic plan. Here's the goals, the objectives, the mission statement. Here's why we're putting this grant in for ecotourism dollars. And it's gonna make getting the funding for lab projects a lot easier, and funding to get, honestly, to get the lab off of the ground when you actually have a plan and say, here's where we're gonna be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Here's our plan, here's what we need now. So this is what we're doing, and I know that kind of is probably obvious, but we just wanted to stress that that's what the plan for the Resilience Lab is designed to do. We're not gonna solve coastal flooding in Morgan City, but in a perfect world, the lab will.
So, once you did this plan, and I'm just thinking hypothetically, like ecotourism, one of the things is we have a lot of, the shrimpers are kind of losing their industry. But, I mean, I always see an opportunity where, say, a visitor wanted to get on that shrimp boat. The problem is with the insurance, and so say I got a group that's coming in today, but I have to go do something with my family. Would the lab be able to help you with, say, a cooperative endeavor program where this shrimper can't go today, but like a process where the shrimpers would have an organization where they could call each other, say, can you take this tour out, and then help with the structure of the financing, that sort of thing, long term.
That was one of the things that came out as a need, and something that the lab needs and will need to be built into the structure, is that kind of administrative support. And I know you're not talking exactly administrative support, but that's along the same lines as, the building that infrastructure so something like you're talking about can occur. And if we say that, this ecotourism hub develops here, as part of that hub process, that would be something that, okay, we have these different organizations, we have the shrimpers who want to give tours, and again, tying into the insurance, like how can, looking into how do swamp tours operate with their insurance, how can we make that work here, how can we, so that I'm just going into this, there's a lot of things that lab can do, and that's where that idea of this ecotourism hub that kind of brings all of that expertise together as kind of that could be address exactly what you're talking about.
Well, and I think too, even though that's kind of that's a very sort of concrete and narrow example, I think that's obviously a need and really important. So when we're, writing the strategic plan and thinking about funding opportunities, I think that's something that we should definitely make sure that the language caters to okay, whether it's a little bit higher level and that is an example of what we want the lab to do. I think
because if you're wanting to do ecotourism and you want it to be authentic, then you have to engage the people that are authentic to that. And they're often overwhelmed with the whole process. And it's very easy for them to say no than to even entertain the idea. And then when the first obstacle happens, then they're like, I'm out.
And I think that's helpful. And we should, maybe in the content for workshop 2, opportunities to talk about some potential obstacles and roadblocks for some of these ideas and how we navigate those in the plan.
And there are examples even in New Orleans and places where nonprofits and things like that are out there to help community members do their paperwork. After the BP oil spill, how many of the shrimpers had no idea how to navigate all of the the labyrinthine federal paperwork they had to fill out to get any type of reimbursement. So something like that could be something that comes out of this where, navigating that paperwork, filling out the forms, how do we do this? There could be that component of it.
And then I think our last slide, just want to remind everyone of kind of where we are in the timeline. So obviously today we're at the local interest group meeting for December. We had our workshop it was at the very end of October, but that was workshop number 1 where we developed and presented the list of objectives, and then we worked with stakeholders to come up with those proposed actions. And so we are currently still working through another, sort of the most recent iteration of those objectives and actions, and it was actually just sent back out to working group participants yesterday for optional comment, and of course our planning team, St. Mary Excel and the parish, will be working on iterating that over the next couple of weeks. But workshop number 2 is going to be in January, so that's where we'll develop, evaluate, and refine alternatives. So obviously the lab can be multiple things, but it can't be everything. So we need to kind of weigh alternatives and think about what's actually feasible as we think about what's going to go into the plan. And then in the spring, early spring, in March, we'll have workshop number 3, which will be kind of a chance to think about how we're going to implement some of these ideas. So we don't want this plan obviously to live on a shelf. Like, it needs to be actionable. We need to think about who are the partners that are going to, because this is, I think when we talked to Evan last week, we were like, this is not a regulatory document, so there needs to be buy-in, there needs to be people at the table who are going to say, yes, I'm willing to take this on. Obviously there needs to be funding. So thinking about implementation in workshop 3, and then I think we'll regroup in the late spring, early summer at that local interest group meeting to give sort of a nearing the end of the project update. I don't think the plan will actually be totally 100% done until closer to July and August, but this will be, we'll be in a pretty solid place at this point to give an update. If there are any questions, happy to take them.
I was just gonna say, I told Monica and Catherine, one of the things at the last workshop that we had, we were sort of rushed at the end.
Yes.
And so I just looked at the dots and said, okay, you know, some of these people had more time to read this, and I'm gonna go with the flow. But I didn't really read everything.
Yeah.
I just sort of voted with the flow. If you get to the point where we go, oh, why didn't we pick this? Can that be sort of tweaked in there?
Yeah, so the structured decision-making process is very forgiving with going back a step if we need to regroup, but also I will, hopefully you can rest assured that we have not like deleted anything. So we kind of looked at the priorities to kind of understand how this is going to shape out, but at workshop number 2, where we kind of give, this is like, I would say probably the like abridged update for this group, but at workshop number 2, when we have the same stakeholders in the room, we'll kind of go through all of the actions, and yeah, you'll get a chance to look at them again.
And for those of you who weren't at the meeting, the slide she showed where you're not supposed to be able to read all of this, that was, you know, Abby and Charles, they went in, everything that, you know, the notes, everything on, that's all of the notes, everything we heard, like put into that kind of structured format. So everything that was mentioned at that meeting was captured and will be included.
Yeah, I'm a hoarder when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'm like, nothing gets deleted until somebody tells me. But yeah.
And for those of you wondering, like, again, I brought up, you know, is this going to be a physical lab or a virtual? That's going to be like that workshop 2, as Abby mentioned, that's where we're going to talk about the trade-offs. What are the trade-offs, timelines? How do we build this out in a way that makes it financially, you know, stable? So, you know, so right now we've kind of taken, you know, a column of text in the ULI report and turned it into everything we saw here. So just thinking about what's been accomplished just in that first meeting, and then the next one is really gonna kind of, okay, now we're gonna start
narrowing.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions that there are no wrong questions right now. So if you weren't at the workshop and you have any questions about anything that's happening, that's a good indicator of what we need to explain and elaborate on. Mike?
I'm still trying to wrap my head around Resiliency Lab, and I think there's a disconnect between when y'all talk to me about Resiliency Lab, it's something on the riverfront, and then we're also talking about something off of, yes. Those are two separate things, right?
And
to me, they seem, it almost seems like it needs to be one thing.
That's why we've got them, and that's why Dr. Roberts is so important to the conversation. And I was going to make some follow-up comments after.
And again, when I hear the word lab, I think of a place that you can do research, so to speak. So some type of, almost like a campus, you know, that you can do these, you know, you can bring in all the different colleges, they'll have facilities, offices, you'll have property that you can do testing on, like real world testing in the ground.
And that's why we needed them. That's something that the locals cannot figure out. And that's why it's so important that they're here, and it's so important that all of those universities were here, because it's not one over the other or the other. We're right there. and we're living it, we got the shocks and stresses, and their research is so critical to how we survive. So just what you're saying, how it all comes together.
And how do we get from here to there?
And they come here to study. I mean,
Yes.
I've said it before, I see them out and about on a daily basis. LSU, UL, they're coming here. So why can't we have this joint facility
And place for them.
for them to come and actually, they can stay, you know, and not have to come here and then leave.
Because now we've been designated, and that's why that designation is like huge. A near, friend would be a near, that's huge, and it all has to fit together because we can't be duplicative. And it will fit together because everything that you've said, that is research, it's education, it's community training, and it's stewardship. So those elements align with what ULI said. You're experiencing all these shocks and stresses, and you're not getting the resources to address what needs to be addressed. So it's all got to fit together, and that's why the local interest group here, we need a plan, a strategic plan, because CPRA, coastal protection, needs to protect us, but they're not going to do it because Catherine and Monica, which Mike says, they're going to say it because there's all these stakeholders that came together. That's why today, you know, our stress yesterday was that nobody's going to show up today. And look at you, you're here because you show up and you say, town of Berwick, that it's important to Berwick, and to the city of Morgan City, it's important to Morgan City. That's the only reason that Catherine and I continue to pull this meeting together, because you show up and you say, you want this to happen. So that's what's happening. And Mike, you're exactly right, how it all fits, it's gotta fit. And nobody's gonna fund something that doesn't fit.
Well, and like I said, almost like a campus, a facility that can house the administrative things that you're talking about, where if someone's interested in that, they can go to that office and say, hey, I'm interested in doing this, can you help me navigate it? Because it's complex, it's
And I think
nothing that anybody would voluntarily do on their own because it is so complex.
Well, like, I'll give you an example. There was a kayak group in Franklin. They had great ideas. Nobody thought about the hyacinths and the problems they cause. And so they took a tour and they did this great circle tour. And they get there and there's so many hyacinths because they were tree branches and they couldn't get through. And so we tried to have meetings on how to address that, and they got overwhelmed because the one solution somebody said was, well, you need to go buy a boat and you're gonna have to police it. And they're like, well, that's not what we signed up for. Like, we don't wanna go buy a boat. And they ended up selling their stuff, which was heartbreaking, but I understood their point of view. You know, they just got tired and they were, you know, but I would have never thought about the hyacinths being a problem and obstructing the waterways. And if we'd have had like a lab, I could have gone to you guys and said, okay, how can we help them without any more investment of their personal finances?
Their business.
And these are great examples of what we see the lab being. Now, to your point, I mean, Monica, I know you've been eyeing different buildings around Morgan City for years where the lab can go, but we need to, and that's kind of looking at those alternatives. How do we get from where we are now to having a campus, as you said, and how do we make that, what are the steps we need to take to get there? Is it gonna be, you know, a handful of professors meeting, you know, in a room on the Mr. Charlie, or, you know, in a back office in St. Mary Excel for the next year as we kind of
Honestly,
set
I
this
think
off?
when you look at a funding source, your quickest way to get to that is to pull in those universities.
Yeah.
And say, look, we want this here for you all. Only up some dollars. And some, you know, long-term investment as far as keeping it up and running.
Right, because it comes in anyway.
Right, that's my whole point, is they are here. Have a place for them to work, to park, to stay, the whole deal. Like, you know, we went to Rockefeller this summer. I mean, that place was amazing, and there wasn't that much to it. Now, obviously, they have thousands and thousands of acres that we're talking about, but it was a facility that they could come, they could work, they could stay. It's out in the middle of nowhere. At least here, it's not the middle of nowhere. You can work, stay, live, whatever.
What
this is a
locations
great,
are you looking at?
That's,
You know,
go ahead. Yeah,
nothing's there.
yeah.
We feel like resilience has to tie into the river in some way. And as far as interpretive is tied to a near. And
Two
we're looking
different
at 30-year identified property, possibly, that's been identified for 30 years from the interpretive storytelling. But we don't know for sure. None of
And that's two different things. And that's what we want to make sure that this can happen, like the near is going to be designated. That's taking a while. We'll talk about that after they're finished, but this is different. We can continue with this now. This is something we can work with and continue to, and have our plan. So this is why we need to come to the workshops and say everything everybody's saying.
So
Yeah.
would it be better to me, they're.
But they do work together.
They are one, they can't be one. So would it be better to look at the resiliency lab in more of a temporary, we'll call it location, and then something you could move into if the near stuff is gonna take longer?
No, we don't know. That's why we have workshops and these people.
We also don't know grant funding cycles, and that's why
Yeah.
Aptum is named up here. Aptum is the parish's grant writer, and we have been writing grants. We wrote 10, 12 of them already, and we still have one out there that could become funded. We don't know if it will or not. So you look for those opportunities and you frame it a little bit, because if this is the pot of money, you have to go up to that pot of money, you've got to meet those. So you take that and you put it in this, because it has to fit, and then, then they decide politically if they're going to give it to you. But the new administration, we've been to a new state administration since we started this, and new federal administration. So then you have to, craft it to fit the way you need to craft it.
And I've said this a dozen times.
Leaders.
You can get money to build stuff. It's long-term that you can't get money. So you need to be cautious that you don't have this beautiful building that you can't afford.
Right.
So whatever's done, it's gotta have multi-purposes so that you can all pool your money to pay for those long-term issues.
That's what universities do.
Yeah.
I know it's not simple, but it seems simple enough to just include that in your strategy, that the nearest part of it, right?
Yeah, that's
Well,
one of
we-
the things that
yeah,
came up
yeah.
in the analysis, was that making that linkage with the near. And there's gonna be a research component to the near, so it makes sense for those to be linked. Now, finding the mechanism and how we make that work is gonna be the tricky part.
Do you have the strategy if that doesn't link?
Well, I think we talked a little bit about this last week, but I mean, any sort of application for federal funding, there's a new administration coming in, there's a way to tie all of this to the economy, and everybody wants economic growth pretty much. I mean, that's kind of, I think, and the Water Institute, we're apolitical, we are a scientific organization, so we're kind of familiar with, I think, navigating sort of different interests and kind of using language that kind of everyone can get on board with. We're not trying to make this sort of divisive type of
This is
plan.
like a incubator.
In fact, we
All
could
these
see an
people
incubator
that
there.
want to do something
They have
like
connections
Terry
with
was just
Nicholls.
talking about. So the resiliency lab by itself is nothing, it needs projects. So the resiliency lab is up here on the top of the pyramid, and then we bring all these other people in, and we see what works and we see what doesn't work. And maybe eventually the resiliency lab would go away because everything is used up and becomes self-supporting. So it's an incubator, just like you go to an incubator mall for industry. and it
Not
doesn't-
really, no. It's a long term. It would be a continual study of the coast of where we are. And this is just, I mean, we know nobody pays attention to anything we put on the internet, but if you could look at any of the videos that we do, at the end of the videos, we have 30% of the flow of the entire continental United States, the Mississippi River coming through this city right now, through St. Mary Parish, the parish. So we have this little design and water dripping, and 30% of the flow comes here. So
I think a lot of people understand that.
They don't.
no, they
I don't
don't.
think
But
they
that's what
realize that.
that's what this is about. So we want this to be a permanent location for the universities for the study, for the things that we're talking about, that everybody will come up with. That's why it's so important to have the stakeholders involved in the discussions with the human capacity that can help us get that done, because we're going to be here and we're important. We're as important as New Orleans in that way, because we have the other part of the river that comes through us. So that's, if we don't ask for it, nobody's paying attention. And all around us, people are asking for things, and they're framing it in such a way that they're getting funds and monies, and we're not getting those same monies. So when Cindy goes, she's going and asks for money for dredging or whatever, we have that actually being studied here. People are here, they're on the river, they're studying why we're doing it, what we're doing, things like that. Those are the projects, the different projects that we're hoping to look at. But I mean, I taught history and English, but I'm not a scientist. So that's why the parish funded with the Restore dollars this study that we asked for this year. So
what I like about this conversation, and exactly what you mentioned, like that is an ideal vision of what the lab could be. But we can't go in and say, this is what you need. That's not, it needs to come from folks like you and the ideas you have, the ideas for what the lab can be. And then it's so, and you know.
Well, and I'm going to say this, and I hope I don't hurt any feelings, but even after leaving that first workshop, there were a number of people still looking around going, what is a resilient?
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's what I mean. Like just scratching our heads, like, I still don't get it.
Right. I like the resiliency campus idea, or something to that effect.
Maybe the lab, the word lab is a
It's the lab that goes off.
Well, and also I think, to your point, like, the first workshop really needed to be a little bit more fluffy, because like we don't know what this is yet. This is a
what's the mission
nebulous concept.
And what you just said kind of opened my eyes, like, you can't tell me what it is.
Right.
You have to tell me what it is.
And then I think workshop 2 is, that's really where we're going to hone in on kind of your initial point about like, how is this going to work logistically? Like thinking about costs, we're not going to, dive into like, we're not putting together a spreadsheet of like, how many thousands of dollars, but like with dollar signs, like, is this costing $3 signs or is this costing like $5 signs? And thinking about sort of the trade-offs, like, is it a physical building? What, who are the partners? And sort of thinking about, how.
Are there other resiliency labs?
I'm sorry?
Are there other resiliency labs?
Yes. Well, we mentioned the one in Norfolk in the presentation. And then there's a few, and then even the smaller labs nested within universities.
Has anyone actually went to any of them?
Charlie was going to go to the one in the Ryan Resilience Lab. I was impressed with Charlie Solar because we had been chatting with mayors, and Charlie said, well, you know what, I'm going to be up there. He said, I'm going to make it a point. Now, he never was able to do it because I think between a hurricane or some other event, things wouldn't happen. But yeah, that was a plan of his, to go to the Ryan. And before that, every conversation we had was with Dr. Twilley, because he sits on the board of the North Carolina one. And
that's what I was going to say. Was there somebody on the advisory board that could help?
That's what connected us to Dr. Twilley. That's what led us to the EMIR. That's what led us all the way through where we are today. It's been a very long
That's one of the
process.
things that came out in the meeting was connecting with the Ryan Resilient. Like,
exactly.
Maybe even if we don't go there, like, let's talk to them. What were the pitfalls they ran into?
We talked to them.
Yeah, we've been doing all that.
I think that I'm kind of like him. I've been coming to these meetings for a while,
Okay.
and I'm still kind of like.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so confused between Lanier and this, and then we talked about the incubator. I'm like, which one are we talking? And then that goes to when you say nobody reads it on the
Oh, it's okay.
Because we don't understand it.
Yeah, no, I get
the
it.
language of scientists is Greek to me, and I'm just like, I don't really know what we're talking about.
It's
I'm
okay.
embarrassed to say it, and you're videoing me saying it, but
it's okay.
I don't understand
It
it.
took us 5 years, Colleen, to get to where we are.
But I still don't.
And we still don't want, yeah.
And
It's okay.
Like, I am more of a tangent, like, I need to see a building with people in it doing something. this is just like in the clouds for me right now.
Right,
My brain
it's
is
all the
like,
planning.
That's why I think
which
someone
one
needs
are we
to
talking
actually
about?
Visit these places to see exactly what's going on, so somebody can come back.
With-
and-
with
Well,
these-
there's so many different, like, they have linear going on, which is completely
Right.
different.
Right.
And then we talked about the incubator, so I'm like, all in on the incubator. I'm like, okay, this is cool. And then,
Mhm.
and then this comes up and I'm like,
Incubator is part of the resiliency.
And it is a
Right?
part of a way of
but I thought the
sustaining-
incubator was
sustaining.
for small businesses to
Yeah,
start.
It is.
I was all in on that, I
That's kind of
understood
It
it.
is, it is.
It's economic resilience.
is, and that-
It's a way to sustain a resilience center when you have an incubator that, you know.
But is the
Okay.
incubator just gonna be for this, or is it
No.
gonna be for, like, he was saying, like.
It can be for both.
Different businesses
It can be
too.
for all of it.
All.
And that's why,
And then
that's.
Lanier also fits
that
in there somewhere.
A near has to be designated. It's completely different from this. They work together, but we still live in Morgan City and Berwick and St. Mary Parish and Franklin, so we live here. So we're not going anywhere. So this is a long-term process for
It's
us.
how to adapt to living
Yes.
on the coast.
Yeah.
FEMA used
Right.
to say, just put your house up and move.
Yeah,
This is saying, we don't want to move.
right.
We want to thrive
Right,
in our
here. How do we
community on the
thrive?
coast.
Right.
And so we're going to bring together all these ideas to help us elevate ourselves to live on the coast.
Right.
Does that make sense?
And-
have
and
the
she doesn't mean
ability to push
physically.
this information to the public.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm
To
gonna
understand.
throw this-
Turn around, because
Public
that's
to where they can-
the agenda, yes. So,
I want to throw this out there, just, and it goes with resiliency, is having educational workshops for contractors, builders, roofers, but where they can come for free,
Yes.
and you have people that come in from those industries and tell them, hey, this is how you need to be doing it now.
this is, yeah.
Because I don't know if and look, also, here is a better product. We don't have that here.
So, you know, Mike, you have all those people coming in to do all this studying. What did they learn? And when did they tell us what they learned?
Right.
There's no.
Well, and if you travel
know they're
outside of
coming,
here,
But we have no idea what they're learning.
you see all of
There's no
these different,
connection.
and then I'm talking construction-wise, you see all of these different construction methods, completely different than what we do here. That would benefit us for resiliency.
Mhm.
Why don't we explore that a little bit? I think it's just because, and look, I was a builder, so it's hard to find things.
Yeah.
And even today with the levee district, it is hard to find things. You know, for instance, I wanted to have the ability to run our cameras at one of our structures off of batteries. It took me almost 2 years to finally figure it out, and it wasn't because someone came to me and said, hey, this is what you need to do. No, it was, oh, let me try this, let me talk to this person, let me try.
And you know, Mike, we are a microcosm of what New Orleans is. So imagine how hard it is for a big urban area like that to address what they need to address. If we could get it right here and do all those things that you're saying, then it's marketable beyond, and they
need to come up with
they come up with the
some product
strategies
and
that
make us
we've
all-
implemented and the barriers we've
community.
overcome on a grander scale. Because
And I think, and it goes back, just being involved with you all for the past number of years. I've had opportunities to meet with different people. There is so much out there that we can utilize as a community, as agencies, as schools, as governments. We just don't know about it.
we're not doing
Nobody came to me and told me, hey, NASA can offer you all of these products that you can use during storms and during rain events. I didn't know they were there.
that you would
Yeah,
want it to know.
absolutely. And
you're
now
the
we
one
have
that's
those
getting
opportunities.
The rain and the storm, and you're the one that needs to know, and
Right,
that
and I
research is
think
going
that's a
back
big
where it
thing,
is.
and maybe part of this resiliency is just the ability to have things and
To be in the know.
information.
To be in the know.
Yeah, to be in the know, because, we have the internet, but
And I'm gonna say
there's still things we
it's
miss out on.
resources needed for the people that are encountering the shocks and the stresses of living in a coastal community that we've grown up with, and we don't think they're shocks and stresses, or we just experience this next event. We ought to have those resources. Those resources are being allocated, but they're being allocated far from here, because that's where the studying is going on. We need them applied here, and we need support for that application right here, because we deal with it. And our human capacity and our people are leaving because the jobs are not here. And those jobs should be here because it is coastal jobs for a coastal community.
Question, quick question.
No, go ahead.
Some of my confusion, and I do post for y'all about this stuff, and I'm still confused about it. So some of my confusion, the resiliency, in my eyes, is like coastal erosion and things like that. But it's not just that, it's also economic. And I think that is a big factor of people not knowing what exactly this is the difference, because when you say coastal resilience, my mind automatically goes to the physical coast. I think we got to dummy it down.
Or energy.
I mean, we are economically
AIC's here.
Why not?
Well, and Greg, your post that we're working for you with the NEAR, like basically that's what it's just so many different things, right. And we're trying to explain stuff, and you have to hear things how many times before, like 20 times, think about when you're sitting in the classroom. Yeah. How long it takes for things to click, and everybody's busy and everybody's working, everybody's got jobs, and so they can't come and listen to this every bi-monthly time we have a meeting. So yeah, it's complicated, and it takes people getting involved and hearing it over and over and over again to understand.
I do think that dumb it down.
Oh yeah, well,
is what we need, because last night we were together in the lounge and somebody was like, what meeting are y'all going to? And we were both like, we didn't know how to explain it. Yeah. And he's like, I post about this all the time and I don't know how to explain it either.
But this meeting is just the local interest group meeting. This is the LIG meeting. So this is the LIG meeting here today, which will be the light, L-I-G-H-T, that shines.
We're going to have a glossary of terminology.
I'm joking. But what I'm saying is, like, we will try to do that. But it's hard to explain it when we just got started with this. This process just started because the money came through. We've been waiting for 3
years. If we change the name, everybody will have clarity.
No.
What I'm hearing is that there needs to be very clear communication. Once we establish with stakeholders and you all, like, what this actually looks like, they're to the point of objective number 1, maximize transparency. There needs to be, like, very clear communication, and that communication to, like, technical people might look different from the communication to, like, people who would be involved in an eco-tour operation, would look different to people who are just, residents who might not have that background knowledge. So there's going to be, like, probably multiple tiers of how we have to communicate what this is to folks so that everybody's kind of on board and understands. So yes, I agree. I'm all for, like, making it understandable to the audience that we're talking to.
And most communication is supposed to be, like, sent out like at a 6th grade level.
Yes.
Right.
And I'm not joking. That's actually
it's true.
I know you're probably here, but I'm dying to talk. Okay. Okay. So first of all, Mike's talking about, and I totally agree, most people don't know a heck of a lot about anything that goes on around here. We have somebody working with us to develop some videos about the port, about industry. We're going to do one on dredging and beneficial use. We're working along those lines once we get all the different dredges in, where we can describe what they are, that kind of thing, just as a little educational piece. So, but the thing, I guess, is that so many people don't know. No, you don't have time, but I'm thinking, like, probably most of y'all don't remember that a few years ago, LED came in, we presented to Morgan City and Berwick-Patterson was already designated as a development-ready community. And so I'm thinking along those lines, we keep talking about a location, a building, and I feel like, I'm talking like on a broader scope, but we're talking resilient. I know that there are some communities, I think, that have already been designated as resilient communities or storm ready or whatever. Could we not go in for the big picture? It's just a thought. I know it's a little bit different from what we've been talking about, but the big picture of a resilient city, a resilient community, a resilient parish, and go along those lines And perhaps, and I think like Mike having to look up things that he needed on that structure, which benefits everybody. If you had a couple of people in a main location, I don't care where it is, that could help with those projects. You know, there are things that Paige does that we could refer, you know, we can go in and call Paige, what can we do with this? Or, you know, there's just, if you know who those contacts are, if you know who can give you that information, then that's what we need, is somebody like a couple of know-it-alls that can direct you in the right direction for whatever those needs might be. Now, we're talking about jobs and we're talking about keeping our kids here. Here's the issue is that, yeah, you might bring your kids back for a job here, but you might not, because we need things for their children, and we're lacking in that right now. So what you were just saying, Scott, about like the little oyster thing or whatever, I have always envisioned Shannon School, near and dear to a lot of people's hearts, but doing something there, like I always thought a children's museum, but then an opportunity to do parties or groups or gatherings, but educational as well, to get those kids on board. And if you had something, I know we talked about an interpretive center at one time. There needs to be a place that kids can go, have fun, learn, and be interested in the jobs that are coming up, because they see what people are out there doing. You know, it might be that we're showing beneficial use and they're like, hey, could we use this material that they're dredging to do this or that? Or, you know, it's to stimulate those minds. But right now, there's nothing for young kids to do. So how do you keep your kids here for jobs when there's nothing for those babies to do? That's my piece, that's my thought.
Well, I want to say too, touching on the jobs aspects, like the biggest issue in St. Mary isn't so much the job availability, it's what type of job you're
The
gonna have.
willingness to do those jobs.
Because like in St. Mary, like blue collar jobs, there's a demand for blue collar jobs. If you have a college education, there's really no point to come and try to work in St. Mary Parish, because you're very limited to what you could do that really requires a college education. But once you have that college education, you get a job. Other really key part is that room for an opportunity for advancement in a career. Like we don't really have, our bigger employers here, talking to them, they're not looking for someone who has a college degree. Like realistically, someone who's gonna come and be a welder is not gonna become vice president of Bollinger. Like that's just not gonna happen. Right. So like that part that I look at is like, what we're seeing is from the population decline, it's more so like a brain drain. Like we're having like kids that are leaving who are going to college, well, they're not coming back here because why would they? And I think that's the big part with this is like, we're kind of creating a new economic environment to have those types of new, higher paying, better qualifying jobs in the parish, which ideally will just increase wages across the board. I guess I look at it as I don't want to just have a bunch of jobs be created if they're not quality jobs. At that point, that's hurting the community more than anything else. But I think it's important that we're looking at the idea of having a physical location. I think it's a little premature to discuss it because we haven't ironed out exactly what this is going to be. Because if we have the idea of what it is, well, that can give us more context on the cost of actually sustaining it. Because if we can't sustain it, well then we should just stop now. That's the whole point, is how can we have this in place and sustain it long term?
That's where the business incubator
Exactly.
came in. And we were really excited, and Lacey did a great job. And we toured over there, we were excited. They're doing an incredible job. And Dr. Clune has, even committed in a public meeting to having a place here. So it's like, okay, let's make all these connections because we gotta sustain. And that's a way to help sustain. Is it exactly what we need? Yeah, it's probably partly what we need, but you also need the resilience part. You also need all of it. So, we made those connections. That's why we were happy Lacey came. So.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to be at the table. Everybody said. Yeah.
I guess the last thing I want to thank everyone for this conversation, because this is why we're doing this. We need to hear from all of you. And when your vision of that, I'm like, yes, that's what. That's what I'm
clicked
thinking.
when you said, y'all need to tell us what it is.
Right.
What you're saying is, here's a building, what do we want to put in it?
Right.
Because we
What
don't
is-
build
Like, we'll
it
write
out.
you the plan, we'll convene, we'll facilitate,
Yeah,
we'll
that-
throw in
that
some
made it clear
suggestions,
for me.
but we can't.
What do we need?
Yeah.
We need to tell you what we need, and I think that
And for
goes
this
back
to be,
to.
and maybe I shouldn't say this, but, to your point, this is all so and part of why we have that slide up there with like the one paragraph, that is the resilience, that's everything we had to go on, and it's like, okay, we need to turn this one paragraph into a plan, and it's like, I know when you, Jessica, Charles, when you came in, it's like, what is this gonna be, so everything you're asking, we're thinking it also, but we've put this structured process in place to kind of get around that. And I do agree on the language. I mean, we can go back and what does resilience mean? Can any of us define it? Probably, we probably all can define it, and no one definition is going to be the same. So throwing out language like that, is it better to call it the resilience campus? Is it going to be a lab to a campus? We'll figure that out as we go. But yeah, a lab is, it's a nebulous word.
And to be fair,
Yeah.
to be fair, I know that nobody's going to go sit and watch one of our meetings online. No. However, they're really good to go back and find something in there and re-listen to it after you have the conversation, because you can go back 3 years and say, oh, this is what that meant, which helps me too, because when I do it, it helps me understand. So
We're going to be doing that tomorrow.
Right.
We're going to be taking,
Yeah.
everything that you said, we're going to be taking notes on this, and this is all information for us moving forward.